Disclaimer. Judge Ron Rangel is providing this podcast and website for educational purposes only, as well as to give the public general information regarding topics related to the criminal justice system. The views, thoughts, and opinions of his guest speakers are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Judge Rangel. All rise. You are now listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, educating the public and expanding mindsets. Subscribe on our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform for more of the latest podcast episodes and updates.
Welcome to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I am your host. Thanks for tuning in. As your host, I'm always excited to be here today. It's been a little while since we've had a recording. This is our 50th episode. Now, without you, the listener, we never would have gotten to this point where we're celebrating 50 episodes of Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel, bringing the courthouse to you, educating the public of what we do. I'm excited. Thank you so much for giving us a chance. I'm going to timestamp this a little bit. Today is the day after Juneteenth. It's a Friday. Juneteenth fell on a Thursday this year. As you know, may or may not know, Juneteenth is a celebration of the end of slavery. The Civil War ended in 1865. I am a bit of a history buff, and I always wanted to be a history professor, so I'm going to take this opportunity to pass along the history part of it. I got involved in the criminal justice system because Abraham Lincoln, who was a big part of things that happened in that time period in our country, Martin Luther King, who was assassinated the same year that I was born, 1968, on April the 4th, were big heroes of mine. And as a result of wanting to learn all that I could about those two fascinating figures, I really developed a love for human rights. I developed a love for civil rights and the idea that we should always fight for individuals that are less fortunate than ourselves. And part of working in the justice system is you're dealing with a lot of individuals that are on the fringes of society. A lot of folks get caught up in the criminal justice system. By and large, most crimes are committed by folks that are not evil per se, folks that are committing nonviolent crimes through circumstances that they find themselves in. Then you get those other types of offenses, the types of crimes where you might be scared of the individual that has been charged, or you might find a heinous situation that you look up and read or hear about on TV and ask yourself, my God, folks in the system can be really somebody that we need to be afraid of. Today, we're going to talk about a very important case. I have an individual in the studio, Anthony Rodriguez, who is an investigator at the district attorney's office. Welcome, Anthony.
Well, welcome, sir. I'm really excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. I know you and I have discussed this in the past, and I'm really happy to sit here and talk to you about this stuff.
When we've talked about you coming on, the basis of it was a lot of these big cases that you handle. You've been involved in some really large cases since you've been working at the DA's office.
Yeah, I had the privilege of being assigned as the major crimes investigator some years back. I'm approaching 10 years working on major crime cases. Mm-hmm. And but lately, especially under the current administration, I really got involved in a lot of major crime cases. And, we actually had a major crimes unit with a major crimes division chief and everything else up until recently. And so during that time when we had an official unit, I had plenty of major crime cases to work on. And so one of the cases that I know you and I discussed was, the barbecue case, as we call it.
Yes.
At that time, we didn't have a major crimes unit, an official unit, but we did have a major crimes attorney, which was Josh Summers. And he recruited me for a number of reasons, not just because the major crimes case, but also because it had a gang component to it.
So we're talking about the DA's office.
We are, yes, sir.
And that's here in Bexar County. Why do we no longer have a major crimes unit?
I don't know. That's above me. I think, decisions were made. Staff was cut, attorneys leave, attorneys go. The DA's office it's an organic organism,
Yes.
You got to kind of shift personnel to different places as needed. For whatever reason, they kind of did away with that. They let the all the prosecutors absorb those cases. That doesn't mean I still don't work on major crimes cases. I'm on a major crimes case right now. Probably can't talk about it because it's still an open case, but I still am involved in major crimes cases.
All right, so you're an investigator at the DA's office.
Yes, sir.
What exactly does that mean?
You know, I remember when I was offered the job. This was back in September 2012. I was in the sheriff's office. I get a phone call. It was late in the evening from the then district attorney Susan Reed, and I didn't believe it was her. She calls. I mean, who's expecting a call from the district attorney? So she calls me late in the evening, identifies herself as Judge Reed, and offers me a job. And I basically said, I don't believe you. And she laughed. She had a very good sense of humor. And she said, no, I saw you on some TV shows. I want to offer you a job. When can you come in for an interview? And so the very next day, told my captain I had to come to court for testimony. From a little white lie, I guess. Went home, changed into a suit, came over here, interviewed with Susan Reed, went back to work, got back in uniform, went back to work. And by the time I got back to the sheriff's office, I had an email saying she accepted me and when can I start? Left there on a Friday and I was here on a Monday. Been here ever since.
She was very personable, right?
The interview, I remember driving over there in my mind, kind of going through my own resume as I'm driving over there. But the interview had nothing to do with my career. Instead, she wanted to know who I was. You want to know if I was married and how many kids and stuff like that. And so I was kind of shocked. I wasn't prepared for those answers. And so I gave her all, everything about me personally. And, we had a couple of laughs. I went back to work. And like I said, I got an email later that day saying, yeah, when can you start?
And I say was, right? She actually is. She's still around. She's working as a visiting judge across the state by assignment. She's retired. And so retired judges get to work as senior visiting judges. And I think that's her status. I've recently been speaking to some folks that have worked with her when she was a DA here. They always speak of her very fondly. They say that the office was a really good office to work in. She had a reputation in the community of being pretty tough. They always speak about her in a way that with great memories. She was great to work with. Is that the kind of experiences that you had in the office at that time?
When I came in September 2012, and I want to say about a year later, she lost the election. So I had a very small window of being able to talk to her. But every time I would see her in the elevator, at that time, a number of shows were coming out consecutively through MSNBC that I was in. And so they were coming out like every week a new show was coming out. And so I would see her in the elevator and she would she would say my name and kind of, call me Hollywood and stuff and give me like a hug. And it was very, at least with me, it was very, smiles and laughs. But I never got a chance to work with her, I guess, on a more professional level, like on a case or anything. I had just started here. I was still trying to learn the ins and outs of being a DA investigator.
Right. And so then you worked with her, and then you worked with Nico LaHood subsequent to that, and then currently you're working with Joe Gonzalez.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you've worked under 3 DA administrations?
Yes, sir.
So Netflix, which is obviously a case we're going to talk about today, was not your first show. You mentioned that you had been on other shows. What shows were those? If somebody wants to look up something that you were, if somebody wants to see why Susan Reed called you Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, I started the first show I got the pleasure of being in was with National Geographic, and it was called Lockdown. And this is in the the late 2000s. I want to say it was around 2006. At that time, gangs was a big thing for TV. There was all kinds of shows on the History Channel, National Geographic, where they just talked about gangs.
Right.
And so National Geographic had their own version of that called Lockdown. And, they came to the Bexar County Jail. They talked to the sheriff at that time and asked if they could come and film. And they wanted to do a show more about the jail with the small little window about gangs. Mm-hmm. And so I was the gang intelligence officer at that time. I was told by my captain, they're going to be here. This wasn't do you want to do it? They will be here. You need to walk around with them and just introduce them to a couple of gang members and explain a little bit about the gangs. And they may or may not put it in the show. And so they followed me around for a number of weeks. And this was my first experience with, I guess being on TV. And I will tell you, when you're being filmed and you're trying to work, it is not as easy as it sounds.
Challenging.
You're very challenging. I was walking around and, you got to make sure you're doing things, 100% by the book and make sure that whatever you're doing and saying, a lot of people could potentially be watching. So it's really difficult. And, a couple of times they would tell me, hey, we just want you to walk down the hallway. Just walk. And when you're walking and they're filming, it suddenly you just forget how to walk. Like you forget how to like just do the normal motions of just walking. And it was weird, but it was fun. And I had a fantastic time doing it, and it was great to experience that as my first time. And it wasn't long after that MSNBC came along with their version called Lock Up, which I guess they were a little bit competitive on their titles there. And that was, I believe, a 6-part series where they followed me around once again
In the jail.
in the jail about gangs, and they targeted specific people, and some of them happened to be gang members and some of them weren't. And so I got to do that. So when all these shows were airing, which was roughly around the same time, that's when I was offered the job to come on over here.
Very nice. So they got to follow these individuals in jail. You were working in jail at the time. And so as a gang expert, then you've been able to bring that concept of your understanding of gangs and how they operate into the courtroom.
Right.
As a DA investigator.
Yes. And so I believe that my original employment was to be the gang investigator. That was the vision that Susan Reed had. And so I remember when she called me and we had the interview, that was the discussion. Like, we need someone over here who has an expertise in gangs that can help the prosecutors prepare their cases, specifically gang cases. And so of course I jumped at it. That was what I was comfortable doing. It's all I really know how to do. And so came over here, and when I got here, I want to say about a month or two later, the gang grant that prosecutor was working under was not renewed. So just so happened that I'm here as the gang investigator, and now we don't have a gang unit. And so I was, briefly, without a home here. We don't have a gang unit. What do we do with you? And so here at the DA's office, we have what's called the intake section. And this is the division where all the files just kind of come in, and we need someone to kind of sort them out. And for about 6 months, I worked the intake section, which is the best thing that could have happened for me, because it taught me how the DA's office works. Coming from an intelligence background, I wasn't in the legal community like the way maybe a detective would be, and that's working homicide cases. I came from a different background. So working that intake really taught me, okay, this is what it looks like when a case is filed. This is what it looks like when a prosecution guide is filed. And it really helped me kind of get my feet, firmly planted here in the DA's office.
So the folks have an understanding then. So what happens is law enforcement oversees the investigation of a case. They put together a file, a packet, some sort of guide, which then goes to the DA's office. The DA's office then, through this intake section, figures out how to file something, looks for elements, makes sure that the case is complete.
Right. Yes, the intake section is the primary ingestion of the DA's office. Everything is submitted in. And for the DA investigators, we just need to make sure that we have everything. That's kind of that's always been the biggest fear, that we've accepted a case and we're missing, something important, especially now more than ever.
So I'm sure that happens all the time, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you have I'll give a great example, Andre McDonald. I mean, that was a monster case. You got the sheriff's office who literally put all hands on deck. I mean, they had everybody involved. They had chiefs, they had their deputies, they had all kinds of detectives. Everybody's doing a billion things. And you had one detective that was receiving all that stuff. And then that one detective had to try to put that together and send it to our office. And so, when I got it, at the time I was Major Crimes, quickly learned we were missing a lot of stuff, not because of any nefarious act. It was so much coming into one person. And so the DA investigator at the intake level is a very, very important role, because you're that first set of eyes that are making sure that we have what we should have. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get everything, but you should have what you should have at the basic level.
Now, Andre McDonald was a big case, and I interviewed John Hunter regarding Andre in this particular podcast. I can't remember how many episodes back, but I do ask folks that are interested in that to go back and review that. But what you're telling me is how significant that role is, right? Because if there's ever a jury trial, one of the things I notice when I speak to juries at the end of every trial, they always say, why wasn't X brought to us? And why didn't the detective get B and C? And you always have to explain that these are very daunting tasks, and these are individuals that are putting these things together. And sometimes these things are available, sometimes they're not. The prosecutors bring generally what they have to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there was a flaw in the investigation or anything like that. Is that something that you can talk about?
Oh yeah, I'll give probably the most common example are 911 calls. The general public doesn't realize that 911 calls have a retention. And they're not held forever. So if that case is submitted to our office and for whatever reason the detective didn't attach that 911 call and that intake investigator didn't realize that we didn't receive the 911 call, by the time it is realized, it may be too late. It's just now dropped off the server or the system. And you have other situations where maybe the wrong case number is written down, so it doesn't make its way over. Yeah, that happens. I mean, we're humans. It's all human entry, data entry, and so that's a common thing. Reports are just mismanaged. For example, we've had cases where it's a two-sided report, but only the front side was scanned in. We're missing the back side, and things end up getting missing along the way. And so the intake section, I think so far this year we've reviewed almost 5,000 cases, and when I say we, the intake investigators,
right?
And it's an ongoing number. I mean, these cases are just constantly coming in. So even our guys who are going through these cases and trying to get it, I mean, they're averaging 20 or 30 cases a day that they're trying to make sure that everything is there. And sometimes even they miss it. It does happen. It's not a common, frequent thing, but it happens, especially when you have huge cases like murders and capital murders where a lot of people are involved in it.
And generally speaking, I think there's right under 200 cases that get filed a week with the district attorney's office. And so every single one of those requires a different set of eyes that are fresh, that know what they're looking for, that know how to put a case together. It's very time consuming.
Oh, very, very. And, and we see, I know I have the luxury of seeing cases submitted from multi-agencies because, Bexar County is a big place.
We've got 23 municipalities,
yeah,
not counting things like hospital districts and constables and things like that.
And we get all those. And so you see the work product from, SAPD, where it's, just this massive work product. And then you might see another agency that's a small city or municipality. It's not going to be that same level of detail, but it's still the same kind of crime. It's just worked up a little differently because of the, where it's coming from. And, I've seen some where you wouldn't expect that level of detail. I've seen some small municipalities like, wow, this guy really put the work in on this.
Yeah, and I'm always amazed. Yeah. I'm always amazed when a detective from a small municipality comes in with a search warrant, and I'm looking at this super comprehensive affidavit, and I'm telling them, you guys did a really good job with this affidavit. And they always seem real happy to hear that because there's always that perception that maybe the smaller municipalities, because they don't have the resources, maybe they don't do as good of a job, but really it's more of a resource issue.
Absolutely. And some of those small municipalities and even like, school districts and things like that. I mean, when you think about the size of their jurisdiction that they have to do, and there may only be 4 or 5 of those police officers, and they're dealing with, a lot of stuff coming in at one time. And so they may not have the same kind of time a detective would have in another municipality where it's just, a small community where they can put all that time and effort in.
One of the things in talking about the resources and dealing with jury trials and the juries that I speak with after the cases, they're always amazed at the idea of the workload that investigators have, right? So what I tell them is, look, you may get an investigator called out to a scene, or in your case, an investigator working within the office. There are so many other cases that are coming in behind that, and so many other more pressing matters, things that need to be dealt with immediately. It's amazing to me to see how much work can actually be done because you're being pulled in so many different directions, out in the field and also at the office here, the DA's office. Can you kind of explain how that works? So folks?
Yeah, for us at the DA's office, we have our daily files coming in that we're working on, but then you also have follow-up emails from the prosecutors for previous cases you've already worked up, where, you submitted that case and then the prosecutor says, hey, we're missing, X, Y, and Z. You got to stop what you're doing on the case you're working on, address that follow up, and then go back to your case. And
Right.
sometimes those follow up emails are just nonstop. They're coming. Then you have walk ins where a prosecutor comes into your office and says, "Hey, I got this." And every prosecutor, their case is like the most important case.
Right.
They don't realize that I have, 20 or 30 prosecutors all dealing with their most important cases, and it's just me. And so, we do our best to time manage. And one of the big things I learned was time management when I got over here. Multitask. I mean, I'm doing, luckily I have two screens. I got one eye on each screen, and I'm just, doing what I can. But it makes the day go by, and it makes the job very rewarding when you finally get to that final stage where you're in the trial. The prosecutors have presented the case that you helped put together. You put your thumb on there a little bit, and you hear those words, guilty. And it's like, okay, I have a sense of completion, and it's a good feeling to have that you were there to help the family feel some sense of justice. I've sat in the rooms where the victims' families walk in, and they're very upset and they want justice, and the prosecutors are sitting there saying, we're going to work hard on it, and the family walks out and you're amped, you're ready, like, hey, let's do this, let's go find that witness, or let's go make sure we have that evidence, and let's make sure we have everything that we need, so when they present that case, it's solid and fluid, and everything just goes right according to plan.
That victim contact seems so important, right? Anytime you hear complaints, generally in the media, they like to pick up things where victims are upset, right? Understandably so, based on whatever it is that happened to loved ones or themselves. And they want that understanding, that communication with the district attorney's office. Sometimes they come at judges. I recently saw where someone had posted that they were a little upset because nobody from the judge's office had contacted them. And it's like, well, judges are not allowed to contact them, right? Judges' offices are not allowed to make any communication regarding a pending case with anybody unless it's on the record. Both parties are there. But with you being there, you get to see that significant emotional impact that crimes have on victims. And so how does that influence or affect the work that you do in terms of your investigation?
Oh, it's crucial, to be there and hear a victim or a victim's family sit there and say how they were wronged, and you hear that. But, our biggest challenge, at least from the investigative standpoint, is TV. Yes. Everybody wants the CSI treatment.
Right.
They think that we have some like database somewhere where you drop a hair on there and it tells you who the person did it.
Right.
And it just doesn't work that way. They want that immediate solution that you see on TV where it happens immediately. They don't realize that everything here, at least in the legal community, is very compartmentalized. If we want to find out whose hair this is, we have to send that off to a lab, who then has to send it to this person, and there's a waiting list because a lot of people are trying to figure that out, and you may or may not get the results that you want. Most of the time you get something inconclusive, so you're kind of left with like, well, I don't know. I'm not saying it's not that, but I don't know. And now you got to kind of like go back to the drawing board and figure out, what do we do? A good example of that is Andre McDonald.
Yes.
Andre, his car, he had a small Malibu car that was found with, it looks like blood was on it.
And that was inside the garage.
That was in the garage, and it was lit up with that, that solution that you see it with a black light and you can see the blood.
Yes.
And so that car was sent to the FBI, who does an amazing job at categorizing the interior of the car, and they're inventorying it. And they write in their report that there's a rag in the console in the driver's seat, and it has an odor of a cleaning product. That's all it says on this report.
Yes.
And so the prosecutor, Mario Del Prado, and I are looking at this, and first thing we think is, what's on that rag, and why would you have a rag with a cleaning product on it? And this product was so damp that the papers it rested on were also damp. So this wasn't like something old, like it had fresh on there. So we were curious, like, what is on this thing? So we sent it off to this lab, and we waited, I think, like several months for a return. And then when it finally came back, it had this long explanation, but basically it was bleach that was on there. We're like, aha, he must have used this rag to clean this car. And going back to the blood that was shown on that light, it wasn't when it was tested, it didn't come back as blood, but it was reacting to the solution. So we were like, well, why is it not coming back as blood if it's reacting to that? And when we find that there's a rag in there with bleach on it, we're now putting everything together, saying, aha, he must have cleaned it, which is why it's not reacting. So as we get closer to trial, we're thinking this is going to be a big part of our trial and how we can show that he was cleaning it. So we bring these doctors and experts in. And at the end of the day, all of our experts saying, well, we can't actually say it's bleach. It has all the ingredients of bleach, but we can't actually say that's what it is.
Right.
And so now the prosecutors are left with what we believe it is, but we can't necessarily prove that's what it is. And so it was one of those things where we were super excited leading up. We did all this work trying to figure it out, waiting all this time for the returns to come in and the results to come in. And at the end of the day, we couldn't use it. We didn't know.
See, and those kind of issues can have a big impact on a case, right?
Oh, huge.
I mean, jurors really expect to see that type of conclusive evidence. And so when there's sometimes a plea bargain or you get a verdict that folks that are watching or following a case on TV or in the media don't want to hear or don't expect, I hear this all the time. It's a slam dunk case. Why would the DA's office make an agreement on to plead to something that is not quite as high as what we think it should be? And the reality of it is that those kind of issues pop up all the time, and they have a significant impact on whether you could prove that case at trial.
Oh, 100%. And I hear the prosecutors talking about it, and a lot of things that I had a prosecutor in my office today talking about a case that sounds like it should be a murder, but they're charging it different. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, and the charge is like an ag assault. And the family was upset, saying, well, why wouldn't it be a murder? And say, well, it's still the same punishment level, except I can prove this, I just can't prove that. And right. So the elements of the offense are really what the prosecutors are looking at. And me, I'm kind of the lay guy, I'm sitting there siding with the victim, like, yeah, why isn't it murder? And then I hear the attorney saying that, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And so the general public, generally, like me, are hearing like, why isn't it this, what we view as something simple, like a murder? We all understand murder. We don't see from the prosecutor side of it where they're actually, weighing all the, what evidence do I have? What can I prove? At the end of the day, is it the same punishment or not? And then boom, they come up with it.
And the reality of it is that do we as a society have the ability to pour the resources necessary to do all these things, right? So we're talking about how difficult it is to do a job like yours, how many cases you're dealing with at the same time, how many different issues are pulling you in so many different directions. The argument could be made that if you put more resources into it, you could get more Anthony Rodriguez's in the office, right? And then the work maybe could be a little more effective. But then you go into the other parts of that, like we're talking about the evidence. And what kind of evidence can you draw from that? And what kind of resources would it take to have that type of evidence always available on these violent type cases? And the reality of it is, it's just not possible. If we were to pour the resources necessary, it would completely bankrupt our communities.
Oh, 100%. And then when you think about it, like when we think about the evidence, you may have that evidence, but there's another wing on this bird, and that's the witnesses.
Right.
So a lot of times, if you need, in order to get this evidence to come in, you need the witness to testify. And that's another facet of what the DA investigator has to do, which is find these witnesses and get them to come in. A lot of them do not want to cooperate, especially our family violence cases. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems that we have. You have these people, generally they're women, sometimes they're men, but generally they're women who are abused, they're assaulted, police are called out, a person's arrested, go to jail. We get the evidence, we get the photos of the injuries, we get the medical report, we know this is what happened, and now they don't want to come in. A lot of times they're back with the guy's out on bond or whatever, and now living with a witness. And here we are stuck with this great evidentiary case, but we don't have the witness to kind of complete that full circle. And that's a big problem that we have.
That's an issue that we had in the BBQ murder trial, right? And we'll talk about that. But a lot of times I've been a part of a case that's been reported in the media where both the district attorney's office and myself, although, sometimes I wonder why judges are attacked in this way. And the reality of it is when these plea bargains are made, it can be that exact issue, right? You don't have the only material witness that you could have in a trial. They're not making themselves available. They're actually hiding from you. And as a result of that, there's no way to get this evidence in. and then folks are sort of left scratching their head going, what's going on here?
Yeah. It'd be nice if you could just bring the evidence in sometimes, you
Sure.
know, but a lot of times the prosecutor can't be their own witness. So like, how do you introduce that evidence? And without that witness, whomever it may be, and sometimes it's law enforcement, sometimes the police don't show up. We're constantly corralling these witnesses to come in, and
Always.
and the judge, this better than I do. Cases are set for trial, then they're reset, then they're set, and then they're reset. And these witnesses are constantly coming and going. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. When we finally call them the fourth time, saying, "Okay, for real, we're going this time," and they don't believe you. And so like, I'm not coming. I can the last 3 times, nothing happened. Why would I come this time? Well, this time it actually went and you didn't show up and we couldn't introduce whatever that was.
And the reason why a lot of that happens is because let's say you have 5 material witnesses, right? Witnesses that are either fact witnesses in terms of seeing the alleged crime occur, or you could have witnesses that are scientific based where they will come in and testify regarding some scientific issue. And maybe one of those witnesses is not available, so the others then are left on hold. Case has to be reset to make it fair, to make sure everybody comes in. So each time you could have a different issue. For instance, I had a detective that was injured seriously. This guy was in a coma. He came out of it, thank God, but he was in a coma for a while. And because he was the detective, none of the cases that he was involved in could be tried. So those cases had to be reset.
Right.
And people are getting angry, like, why are these cases consistently being reset? And they're consistently being reset because he is in a coma.
Right. And us, the DA investigators, are equally upset because we're out there getting everything ready to roll, and because the prosecutors want to be ready. I mean, they just don't know what's going to happen. Some of these dockets, there's like 5 or 6 cases on that docket, and the judge is going to pick one, and that prosecutor has to be ready for all 5 or 6.
Yes.
Especially with the misdemeanor cases, and so these investigators are out there getting 5 or 6 cases ready at one time and try to get everybody in. We have victim advocates, same thing, who are really the heart and soul of the office.
Yes.
On the phone with these victims, trying to corral them to come in, trying to convince them to come in. And again, I can't speak enough about family violence, on how they're trying to get these. And like I said, generally it's women trying to get them out of that zone of fear to come in and face their abuser. And they come in, and then maybe the case doesn't go, and now they got to go back out. And we got to repeat the process, 5 or 6 weeks later. And a lot of times they just lose all faith in us. And we have a really hard time presenting that case.
That could be disheartening, I can imagine, on all sides. And well, with that thought, let's do a quick Q&A break. You're listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Rangel. Stay with us. We've got some questions from the audience coming up next.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at BeyondTheGavelPodcast.com.
Welcome to the Q&A break. Let's take a question from one of our listeners. Reads as follows: have you seen any AI in the court yet? My response would be maybe. I really don't know. I mean, you can imagine how AI affects everything in the process. What about you, Anthony?
So, yes and no. We, the investigators, have access to jail calls, so we can listen to jail calls, and AI has kind of entered that world, and so we now have access to programs that allow the prosecutor and us investigators to type a word in, and the computer will now listen to the jail call and identify calls that word may or may not have been spoken. And so that's helpful when you have a guy who's been in jail for maybe a year and you have over 1,000 jail calls. Mm-hmm. You don't know if any of those calls have any relevance to your case at all. And so traditionally, before AI entered this world, we, the investigators and the prosecutors, had to listen to all of those calls.
Every single word.
Because it could be a little quick, something there. Mm-hmm. And so now with AI tools, we can put a word in, the computer will identify these calls, and then we can listen to those calls. So, and then those calls are now used in court. Now the AI program isn't used in court, but the AI helped us mine out those calls, which inevitably become the evidence in the court.
No, that's a brand new phenomena, right?
Oh yeah, we're still kind of learning how this thing is going to work out.
So you've started doing this within the last how long?
I think it was 2016. No, I'm sorry. 2019 that we got the first version of it. And so for us, we can now double down our searches, and it's been very, very fruitful. We've been able to identify calls that have been helpful. A great example are family violence cases. You know, I instructed all the investigators and the prosecutors to just type the word sorry, because if it's a family violence case, if you type the word sorry, you're likely going to get an admission to whatever that family violence that occurred.
I can't say I've seen it enter into the courtroom yet.
Sure.
It's interesting. And I guess with the intelligent experience that you have, that's helpful as well to know how to mine what AI can provide for you.
I go so far. I feel like an old man, you know. I go all the way back to when we had cassettes. You know, all the calls were on a cassette, and then I remember when it became digitized into an internet frame, and we thought, wow, this is amazing. And now we're in this AI world, and it's like it just keeps getting better as the years progress.
Makes sense, and I'm glad to know that. That's good for me to know. I think thinking about how these cases come into the courtroom. That's a great question. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. We really appreciate the input. Don't stop sending your questions. You can text Beyond the Gavel anytime or reach out through our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com. Now let's head back to the show.
This is Q&A with Judge Ron Rangel. Submit your question today at beyondthegavelpodcast.com.
Welcome back to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. I'm here with Anthony Rodriguez. What you talked about how when you first started at the Bexar County Sheriff's Office, you then came over at the DA's office and you left, you were a gang intelligence officer. Let's talk a little bit about that kind of work. So what specifically does a gang intelligence officer do?
Sure. So I started my career when I was 19 years old, fresh out of high school, didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I wanted to be career-wise. And I think I did what every 19-year-old does. I was like, you know what, let me do the 5-year plan. I'll go over to this place for a couple of years, you know, earn some money and then go do something else.
Right.
And obviously, here I am 25 years later. That didn't happen. But so I go to the sheriff's office. You know, the sheriff's office at that time would hire you at 19 to be a jailer. You can't be a police officer till you're 21 or 6 months before your birthday. And so I couldn't be a police officer, but I did want to get into law enforcement. So joined the sheriff's office to be a jailer. I think today they've significantly reduced it. I think now they're down to like 17 years old. You can be a jailer. But at that time, 19 was the floor. And so came in. I remember my grandfather actually drove me to the first day at the Sheriff's Academy because he was worried that I would be too nervous to get there on time. And so get over there. First day, in those days, the academy was at the jail. Like we were in the parking lot of the jail doing all the running and everything. And the classroom was in the jail. There was like a little classroom down in the basement. And it was a 3-month academy. And I grew up in a very sheltered household. So I knew nothing of gangs, nothing at all. And I remember there was a 1-hour block on gangs in this 3-month training we had where the instructor goes up there, hands out this piece of paper, and it had all the names of these gangs like in little squares. And he just went up there and just read off the gangs. And I remember sitting there just shocked, like there's gangs here in San Antonio. It was news to me. It did not resonate with me at that time, but it really intrigued me. I just wanted to know more. And so when I became a jailer or a detention officer, the first 2 years, I'm just working units. And so for the listening audience, you know, a unit officer is, you know, you're managing a unit of 64 inmates. You're sitting there in the center. There's cells all around you. Your job is to let them out and put them back in.
You're in the pods.
You're in the pods. And it's, you know, it's very structured working in the jail. It's very regimented. It is by design. You know, they come out at a certain time, they're fed at a certain time, medication a certain time. So it's very routine. And the problem with that for a 19-year-old is it gets boring, you know. And so I remember buying the newspaper, bringing it in, and I would literally read it from the front page to the last page. I'm reading like the coupons. I'm reading like who wrote the articles. I am reading everything on there just out of sheer boredom. And every now and then you get some excitement. There'd be like a fight or something. But for the most part, it's very routine, which is what you want. You don't want fights. You don't want any of
Right.
that stuff.
Right.
And so this went on for 2 years, and there was an opening in what's called the classification section. And this section, the job of the class officer is just to house inmates. At the core level, that's all they do is house inmates, but it's very compartmentalized. So you have certain officers that house, female inmates, certain officers that house mental inmates. Well, you have officers that house gang members. And I wanted to do that because I was still curious. I still wanted to know more. And so I joined classification. You had to go through like a testing, and you had to go through like an oral board, and I made the cut and go through like a training, and they train you how to be a class officer. And they, at the beginning, I just was housing general population inmates, and you kind of work your way up. And I guess I was good at it. The then class manager, who's now a DA investigator, his name is Patrick Skillman. He one day brought me in and said, "Hey, do you want to do gangs?" And I said, "Sure." And the one thing he told me is, because I'm kind of a nerd. And one thing he told me is, in order to be a gang officer, you got to have a little street in you. That's what he said. And so, because you have to talk to them, you have to physically walk into those cells and sit down and talk to them. And if you don't speak their language, they're not going to talk to you. And so he says, we're going to try you out. We're going to see how it works. And so they gave me that assignment. I started working gangs, and day one, I just forced myself to walk into these cells, and I forced myself to just start just building a rapport with these people. And I was a gang intelligence for 10 years, but I wasn't effective until my last 3 years, because it took that long for me to learn how to talk to these guys, get them to talk back to me, and really learn about the gang. I went in fresh. I knew nothing about these guys. And but I have a skill. I have the ability to be a conversationalist. And
That's why experience is so valuable.
oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And I remember going in there and not talking about the gangs at all, just talking to them about their life. Like,
Did you have fear? You have
well, at this point, I'd already been a jailer for a number of years, so I'd already learned, how to talk to inmates in general. And when I remember early on talking to a very high-ranked member of the Mexican mafia, and one thing I learned about gangs in general, all gangs, is that they orbit around respect. And I remember this guy telling me it's all about respect. It's respect for respect. If you treat me with respect, I'll return that. And so I remember sitting there talking to this very high ranked member. We're going back and forth, and he's kind of repeating that, like, it's all about respect.
So when you say respect, you're talking about just the way you communicate.
The way you communicate. Because
Right.
there were some jailers that were very aggressive. They would walk in there and they'd call them all kinds of names and stuff. It was a very like an elitist approach to talking to the inmates
That doesn't work with anybody.
at all, especially those guys who are very machismo. They're very, how dare you, this is my house type of attitude.
Yeah.
And so I would go in there with, a yes, sir, no, sir type of response with them. I was very, very cordial as best I could be. There were times where you couldn't be. There were some inmates where you had no choice but to come a little bit more aggressive, but it was very rare.
Yeah.
And
Kind of depending on the situation, the way you read it.
sure.
And, yeah.
And you would know going in. I mean, if they're there banging on the door when you walk up to it, that's not going to be a guy you're going to, yes, sir, no, sir,
Right.
But I do remember going in there, talking to him and being just very respectful. And he complimented me. And he goes, you know what, you're going to go a long way if you talk to us this way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of kept that moving forward, and you build a reputation amongst the inmates and the gangsters. And a lot of them had another philosophy is you just don't lie to them. And so I was always very truthful. If they asked me a question and I didn't know, I didn't make it up. Or if I knew they were going to get locked down or segregated because I was in charge of housing them, I'm going to move them. I told them flat out, you're getting locked down. It's going to happen. And
Right.
I'm not going to beat around the bush. This is what's going to happen. And yeah, they would get upset, but they understood. And one thing about gangsters in general is they understand the world they live in. They understand that law enforcement has a job to do, and they understand that they, to a certain degree, have a job to do. When you look at gangs like the Mexican mafia, they have a constitution. They have a manifesto. You can go online and read it. And in their constitution, they have a very somewhat famous phrase in there. And they say, it's written in there and it says, we will engage in any criminal activity for the benefit of the gang. And they list all the crimes they're willing to do, from murder all the way down to assault. And then they have a last little line where it says, and anything imaginable. which means they're willing to commit crimes that we haven't even defined as a crime yet. And so they understand that their place in the world in this gang is to commit crimes. And they understand that there are people whose place in the world is to arrest them and to convict them. And so what they would explain to me is like, look, we get it. You have a job to do. Just don't enter our world. And what they mean by that is don't get into corruption. Don't do anything illegal, because the second you do that, you're now in our world. And that's different. And so I've always built that wall where I did this, they did that, and we just left it at that. And they understood it. And, here I am 25 years later, and, knock on wood, as I say, no problems.
Well, it's kind of the same perspective on the judicial side too, right? And I'm sure prosecutors go, as a defense attorney, I went through the same thing, right? You deal with them honestly. Mm-hmm. You let them know specifically, this is my role, right? My role is to do blank, and whatever that role is in the legal profession. And by and large, that's what's respected. So when you're talking about respect, you're talking about your role.
Your role. That's a good way to put it.
Yes.
And they're very. They recognize it immediately. I remember there was this guy that was this gang member I dealt with a lot that was constantly corrupting guards.
Yes.
And I walked up to him one day. It was his fourth or fifth incarceration. Just came in, knew he was going to get somebody, and I'm just having a conversation with him. And at one point I asked him, I said, "How do you know which guard to try to corrupt?" And he goes, "Well, I look at their shoes." And he said, there was this guy that came in, the last incarceration came in, and then when he walked, his shoes flapped. He couldn't afford new shoes. And he goes, that guy. He goes, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try him. And he got him. He was able to get him to bring some stuff in.
So somebody is financially vulnerable.
Right.
That's kind of what they're...
And it's an easy way to identify somebody. You look at their uniform and it's torn or full of food stains or whatever. I was always very particular about trying to look neat and clean and whatever else. That's a big reason. These guys are constantly sizing you up. I try to always have a haircut. And because if they look at you and they think, oh, look, this guy's, like you put it, financially vulnerable. He's vulnerable. That's the key point. And they go in. And they're very good. They're very manipulative. They're all silver tongued. They know how to talk. And so I found it for myself when I would talk to them. Not only did I keep it professional, but I would joke around with them. I would just always say jokes, ask them for a new joke, and just try to keep it as casual as I could. And occasionally, you hit a soft spot. You say something that upsets them, and you kind of quickly have to remember where the door is at and pop out of there. But for the most part, I never really had any problems with them, and they were very, very open with me, which is how I learned as much as I learned about the gangs. Their rule was never to talk to law enforcement, but they would talk to me. They would tell me these things. And for me in classification, my job was to house them. So they wanted to house with their other gang members, and I found it easy by saying, I don't believe you're one of them. Prove it to me. And they would say, well, this tattoo means this, or this means that. And so they're trying to convince me that they're that gang, so I would house them. And in the process, I'm learning what these different things mean, which is what made me an expert.
So what happens when you house somebody who maybe is not a part of a particular group? Is that a danger to them? Is that the idea with the...
Oh, yeah. And, So one of the things I had to do, aside from just housing them, was identify the leadership. And they're very sneaky. They have what's called a puppet, and that's just like the fake leader. And that fake leader would talk to you just in case something negative happened. You would punish the fake leader while the real leader is over here doing whatever. So I would play along with whoever the puppet is, but at the same time try to find out who the real leader is. And that's where the intelligence process began. Well, I'm listening to that guy's phone calls, I'm reading that guy's mail, but I'm talking to this guy. Well, this guy would normally tell me, hey, that guy in cell 15 y'all put in here yesterday, he's got to go. He's not one of us. They were generally pretty open. None of them wanted to catch an additional case. None of them wanted to catch assault, because they knew if we left him in there, they were obligated to do something about it. So I would have this rapport with them. I always told all of them, give me at least 24 hours. If somebody's put in here that doesn't belong, just give me 24 hours. If I screw up, that's on me. And so I had to go in there every single day, because if I missed one day, it could be a problem. And so every day I'd go visit that individual, whoever it is. And there's multiple gangs, and each gang has their own leader. So I had to go and visit each alleged leader and talk to them all, and they would tell me, hey, this guy was put in here got to get them out. And so we just move without even asking questions, just move them out, and then we'll deal with the investigation later.
So, as a recognized gang expert, what are some of the ways that you've been able to put that experience together, right? What are some of the ways that you could use that experience within the justice system and dealing with the cases?
Yeah, like barbecue case, for example. When Josh got the case, he came to me mainly because of my gang experience. This was a gang case. This was a case where the two defendants were known members of the Mexican mafia, and the victim was also a member of the Mexican mafia. So one of the questions Josh had was, did this murder happen because they're members of the gang, or did it happen with members of the gang? Like, which one was it? And so he came to me, and one of the first things I recognize is, they have a constitution. So if this was a gang hit or a sanctioned hit, there's going to be a paper trail. And so going through my own, tricks of the trade or whatever, look into that, and I learned through my own investigative techniques that it was not a sanctioned gang hit. It's just happened amongst gang members.
That makes sense. So at trial, you're trying to prove they did something. What's the motive, right? Even though that's not an element of the crime, having the motive is important to get a jury to understand the dynamics.
Right.
So you're involved not just in the investigatory process, but also in the litigation, the trial process, the strategy, right? Basically how to strategize on how a case is going to go.
I know when I testify there, I'm always asked that question, what does a DA investigator do? That's generally one of the lead-up questions that they ask. And I always answer the same way. I assist with trial preparation. Right. And whatever it is that I'm doing on the gang side of it, at the end of the day, is to help the prosecutor properly prepare this case and, more importantly, present the case. And I don't know what strategy that prosecutor is using or what, how they're going to present it. At that time, they may not even know. Right. So, but my job,
figure it out.
Right. Yeah. So I'm just feeding them information. And the analogy I always use is, I'm setting the dinner table. They pick what they want to eat. Right. I don't know what it is,
Right.
And so, I go in there and I tell them, this guy is a gang member. This guy is a gang member, whatever gang it is, and whether or not, as an expert, I think it may be a gang hit. It's very rare that we get like the gang hits. It does happen, but it's rare. A good example is we have a lot of those East Side shootings where people are going to spraying neighborhoods. That's a targeted attack, and a lot of times there's a gang component to it. Now, where we hit weird nuances is maybe the person that was hit, maybe it was just a bystander, and we saw that with the Whitley case where the young boy was hit.
Right.
That obviously wasn't the intended target, but that was a gang related attack intended for a specific target. It just wasn't the right person that was hit, sadly.
I've seen you come into court, testify. You've testified about things like tattoos, which is what you were just referencing just a moment ago. Can you explain to us how that works in terms of trying to figure out tattoo markers and what they mean and how that assists you in the job that you do?
In the world of gangs, tattoos aren't art. They're a message. And they're the intended recipient of that message are members of their own gang or rival members. So when they enter that jail, one thing about gang members is they are masters of nonverbal communication. Masters. And we see it all the time without even knowing it. I mean, you ask any person on the street, what does the red shirt and the blue shirt mean? They're all going to say Bloods and Crips. I mean, right. That is an example of nonverbal communication where you see a guy all in red without a word being spoken, that could be a Bloods gang member.
Right.
And so tattoos work in that same orbit. They're all about unspoken communication, where I walk into a prison or a jail or a neighborhood without saying a word. The people looking at me, if they know how to read that message, know what I am, and either they can come and talk to me or they stay away. And this is why you see, a big part of tattoos is not just the tattoo, but the placement of the tattoo. So when you see a tattoo on the back of somebody's head, that's not art. That's generally a gang member telling somebody who would approach from behind, maybe to attack, stay away, I'm this.
Right.
And so you see that on the back of forearms, you see in those certain places. And And so when I was working in gang intelligence, one of the first things I had to learn was not just what the tattoo is, but where it is. Where is it on the body? And learning that part of it immediately, without even looking at the tattoo, I could say that's a gang member. And then now I look at the actual messaging, and now I can say it's this gang. And so with gang members, one interesting fact is with them, numbers will almost always correlate to letters of the alphabet, almost always. And we see like the number 13. We all see it on TV. Gangs have kind of got a lot of TV lately with the cartels and stuff. But even in your neighborhoods, you're driving around, you see spray painted 13, whatever. Well, the 13th letter of the alphabet is the letter M. Right. So M for Mexican or Mexican Mafia, whatever. And so you start learning, okay, I see this number. What is that letter of the alphabet? And then once you know the letter of the alphabet, it's pretty easy to figure out it's likely this gang.
Which is interesting. What happened to me at one point, this is early in my career. I was presented with a case, and I think the maximum punishment I could give this individual under a plea bargain was 15. And 14, after I heard all the evidence, it sounded like it was just a little too much. 12 didn't seem to be appropriate either. So I went with 13, not really thinking about what it meant. But subsequent to that, when the individual left, he was telling the bailiffs, right, the guys that work with the sheriff, I'm very thankful he gave me 13 because that identifies that I'm a member of the mafia.
Wow.
And I'm thinking in my head, what?
Yeah.
That didn't have anything to do with why I picked that number. But those are things that we got to be cognizant about, right?
Oh,
because that number, other gang messages really send something, and we don't want to get caught up in that.
And it's weird what they attach onto. What is, especially numbers. Numbers are always weird. A good example are the Aryan gangs. Aryans, view their gang membership as more of a religion. In fact, when they meet on the outside, they call that going to church because it's very faith based. And so they have a number 14. And it's a creed. And in that creed, there's 14 words in that creed, which is something to the effect of, we will, make a better world for all of our white children or something like that. Mm-hmm. And this number 14 for them it's a crucial number. And so they do a lot of things around the number 14. So they might meet on the 14th or they might meet every 14 days. And so 14 is almost like a sacred number to them. So I could see them, if you were to sentence one of them to 14 years, they would probably take that as like some sort of divine, aha, like, yeah, I'm on the right path over here.
It's something I'm more cognizant about now, for sure, when I sentence individuals, when I have to sentence individuals. So when it comes to coming into court and testifying as a testimony related to the evidence that you're providing, what circumstances would that be important? Because I can imagine you probably get called to testify or you prepare to testify. You get into a court, then there's always an objection, right? Generally, I always see a defense object to you testifying. I can imagine there are times that judges will sustain that objection and say, you can't testify about what you came in to talk about.
Absolutely. And the big thing is, so gang members, one of the ways I became a gang expert was what's called a gang letter. Uh-huh. So in the jail, in order to house somebody as a gang, we actually have them fill out a letter, and it's acknowledging their gang affiliation. And what's great about that letter is they sign it. So they're saying, I am this gang, and they sign it. That gang letter is what the prosecutor wants to introduce. Uh-huh. And a lot of times the officer that got that gang letter may not be with the sheriff's office anymore, uh-huh, or SAPD or whatever. So now the prosecutor, like we talked about witnesses earlier, is left with, how do I introduce this evidence, this gang letter, but I don't have the officer? Right. How do I get there? And one way is to use an expert. And by using an expert, they can ask me, once they proffer me as an expert, what have you reviewed to come to an opinion that this person's a gang member? And one of those things could be the gang letter. Well, sometimes, there's going to be a hearsay objection. I wasn't there when the letter was obtained.
Right.
And so sometimes the judge will agree. Like, it doesn't matter that I'm an expert. Whatever the reason may be, the judge agrees with defense. Gang letter's not coming in. But I work with a lot of prosecutors, and I tell them, let's have a plan B. And the plan B is, let's photograph the inmate, because now I have the gang letter, and if it doesn't get in, so be it. I could testify to the tattoos.
And I've seen that.
Right. And prosecutors love the tattoo stuff, because now Yes, the gang letter comes in, but it's kind of boring. I'm showing them a paper with a word on it and a signature.
Right.
But now I can show them this art where I can say this means this and this means that, and only certain members have this, and they
It's
see
identifiable.
right. And I think the juries just love that. They love seeing that. And when you think about the defendant, he's sitting there, he or she is sitting there in a suit, looking very professional. And then suddenly you see these photos where the entire upper body is just covered with these scary looking tattoos.
And I've seen that, yes.
And most of the time, I would probably say well over 90% of the time, my testimony is in punishment. It's very rare that it's case in chief. And I don't know, your listening audience may not know that a trial is broken up into two parts.
Right.
And so case in chief is really hard to get gang stuff in unless you can show that the crime committed had some direct relation to the gang.
As a motive.
Which is hard.
Because the case in chief, what you're trying to prove is did the individual do this crime?
Right.
Period.
And so if you're trying to bring in gangs, they're trying to say he did it because he's a gang member,
right?
Which is really hard. And I think the only time I come in case in chief, strangely enough, are the misdemeanor cases for like the unlawful carrying of a weapon.
That makes sense.
Because, there's a provision in there that gang members can't carry.
Right.
And so now, but that's even harder because now we have to show, or the prosecutors will show that not only are they a gang member, but they're on their way to do gang stuff. And in the process, they had a gun. So I can say, yeah, they're a gang member, but I can't say they were on their way to do something gang related. That's generally some other witness has to come in. But that's generally when I come in for case in chief is something like that, which is rare. It is super rare. It's far more common for punishment because they're trying to show future danger. And what better form of future danger than a scary looking gang member?
And that's an issue of punishment, right?
Oh, yeah. And so defense prejudicial. They don't want it to come in. They want the balancing test and all that stuff. And then you guys come in and make your ruling. The judges come in and make a ruling. And most of the time they do allow my testimony. It's just what I can testify. That's the next kind of battleground that they go through.
So when you're talking about the balancing test, that's a combination of how probative is this evidence or how important is this evidence to make this point, to prove this issue, versus how prejudicial is it? And anytime I hear one side talk about how prejudicial or how significant something is that points in a certain direction, the argument is always, well, yeah, that's why they're trying to bring it in, right? They're trying to prejudice the jury in their favor. But you can't be so prejudicial that outweighs the idea that this is important for them to consider.
Right.
So that's important. So I can see that at punishment. And frankly, you've come in and testified in a lot of cases before me. And in seeing that testimony, that generally is when I see you, is during punishment.
Right. Yeah. I think most judges, see me in just it's very rare case in chief, unless it's a case I'm working on. And a lot of times I'm sitting in the courtroom behind the prosecutors and, handing them papers or whatever. But for the most part, they see me in the punishment, especially in this context of the gang expert. So, my job in the DA's office is kind of it's a weird two-part job. And in some aspects, I'm doing DA investigator stuff. And then other aspects, I'm doing the gang expert stuff.
See, and that's important for prosecutors. And for instance, when I was a prosecutor, let's say I had a murder case, I would drive out to the scene. I would scope every part of it, get a true understanding as of what that scene looked like. As a defense attorney, I did the same thing, right? I'd go to a scene just to get an understanding in terms of like the layout of things and how things work. Because when you're in court working as an attorney, a prosecutor, or defense attorney, you use that information as reference, and it makes your arguments more effective. So basically communicating with you and having you in on a case gives them that full perspective, which without, they could not be effective in handling that case.
Oh, yeah. And for some situations, I'll give you another great example is when a crime occurs in a jail. A lot of prosecutors don't know what it looks like in a jail. Right. And so they're reading on the paperwork about whatever crime occurred. Most of the time it's an assault. Sometimes it's assault on staff, like a jail guard or something. They're reading it, but they don't know, it's hard for them to picture how this happened. So occasionally we'll take the prosecutor into the jail and we'll take them to that living unit. Like, this is where the person was at. This is where the inmate was at. This is what happened. And now they can actually see it in full 360 view versus looking at a little photo,
Right.
or looking at some weird angle from the jail surveillance camera, or looking at the body cam from the riot officers in there.
Makes them much more effective.
Much more. And now they can present that better. And more importantly, when they're cross-examining somebody, it allows them to understand where that narrative is going in that questioning, and kind of pivot whatever way they need to do it. So it's been very effective taking them out to like the jails. I've taken some prosecutors out to some of and not just me, all investigators, some of these neighborhoods that are not a neighborhood they would normally be in. Some of our prosecutors live in very nice, affluent neighborhoods, and they got to go out on the east side somewhere in places they've never been. And so we'll take them out there, and we'll go to these areas where whatever crime may have occurred. And we'll show them, like, this is where it was at. This apartment complex doesn't look like a normal apartment complex. It's kind of designed kind of weird, and we'll kind of walk through there, and then we'll get out of there as quick as we can before we get recognized.
And it's important, it's issues like one time as a defense attorney, I went out to a home, and the argument was a lady was being assaulted in a home, in a bedroom, and there's no way that family across the home, on the other side of the home, would be able to hear anything because of walls and all of that. But when I went to it, it was basically a trailer park. And within the trailer park, this is a very small trailer that this offense allegedly occurred, and the walls were paper thin. And so there's no way anywhere within that trailer that anybody would be yelling out and screaming and somebody would not hear.
Right.
But for going to that place, I never would have known that. And I was able to use that in a way that was effective.
Oh yeah, and I had a case actually with, I think it was another prosecutor named Matt Ludwig, who was on the barbecue case with me, where he had a case where a car hit another car on the highway, and the defense was saying, well, it kind of crested this hill, and they couldn't see that there was a car on the other side of this hill.
Right.
And so we went out there, we drove out there, and we kind of looked, and we even got with DPS and took a helicopter around there and looked at different angles and stuff to try to allow him to put himself where the defendant would have been at the time when this thing happened. And he was able to say, no, it's impossible. There's no way you couldn't have seen this from a crested hill. Right. And it's weird because if you look at a photo, it almost looked like that was a possibility. But he went out there, and I was with him, and we spent all day just kind of looking at this area, and he was able to put on a good case, and he got a conviction.
And all that is work that you're doing outside the courtroom. Meanwhile, you're inside the courtroom handling cases that are up for trial with demanding judges, lots of different judges that want to see that case tried and pushing you to go to trial because they want to move that docket. That's got to be very challenging, right?
I don't know how these prosecutors find the time. I'll come in. I normally get in around 7:30, and there's guys already in their office. They've been in there working. I'll leave at about 4:45, 5 o'clock, and they're still there. I know some guys come in on the weekends. These prosecutors are working, especially as it gets closer to a trial date. Yes. They are working nonstop, interviewing witnesses, looking through paperwork. And, some of these cases, when we're looking at things like a cell phone, that's a lot of information you have to look through, that the detective may have looked somewhat through it, but that prosecutor really has to look through it. It has to know what's in the phone, because you don't want to be blindsided with some information that defense may have picked up on, or a witness may testify to during, the questioning. So these guys are constantly, they're, body cams. Ring cameras. All that's got to be viewed. All of it does. And because you never know what's going to be in there. And they're just, nonstop looking through this stuff. But they're true professionals. They're truly dedicated to the overall mission.
Very easily something can be overlooked. I have observed documentations that have come in, admitted into evidence, for instance, of a cell phone. And the documentation that is related to what their specific issue is that they're looking for is maybe 6 inches thick. Of papers. And imagine them going through each and every piece of paper, each and every little part of it, trying to figure out something. And I don't recall necessarily this experience with me, but I do hear prosecutors come in to talk about how they were in the middle of trial and they happened to come across something which ended up being crucial in that case and made all the difference in the world. So I'm asking myself, they're doing all this trialing, talking to people in court, dealing with the witnesses, dealing with the legal issues, doing the legal research, and yet they were still finding time to go through this documentation and find that.
They're nonstop. These guys are on breaks, they're working, and it happens. Andre McDonald's another great example. We were getting close to a trial date. I think it was the first trial date that got reset. We're approaching that date. And we had an intern in our office who Mario Del Prado and I had gone and we mined out a new witness, and we're talking to that witness, and she's showing us her phone, and we see that she's texting Andre around the same time Andre's body was found, and we suddenly realize, we can get into this phone that Andre had after he bonded out. It had never been looked at because of that texting between that witness and Andre. And so we go through the process of getting the search warrant, doing all that. But it was an intern that pointed out, like, why haven't we looked at Andre's second phone, the phone that he had after he bonded out? Something that everybody overlooked. The prosecutors overlooked, detectives overlooked. And so because of that intern, pointing that out, and because we were able to find that text message between the witness and Andre, we were able to get a warrant. We dug in there, and that's when we found, just a treasure trove of Google searches where he's searching things like, can you find a fingerprint on wood? How long does it take for a body to decompose? Is Texas soil alkaline or acidic? He is searching because he knows the body's out there decomposing. Like, how long is it going to take for it to fully decompose? He can't go back out there. The whole world's looking for Andre, but he's searching every day, all these very specific things about her body. And, Mario Del Prado brought up a great point. He's like, we actually have an opportunity to see what he's thinking while law enforcement is looking for her body. And it's true. You look at those search messages, like, holy cow. He is, but it's something that we mined out, before the trial. And now we had this other phone. We had to get it in. We had to put together a taint team because he had a lawyer at the time.
Right.
We had to go through that whole process. And once we got cleared from that process, now we had to go through the phone, and the clock is ticking. We're getting closer to our trial date as all this stuff is coming in. And so we're all hands on deck going through this thing, and we're just finding all this great information. I kind of felt like I'm fishing. I'm just catching a fish, nonstop. I just can't. And so it's one of those things where you get this adrenaline surge because you get all this great stuff, but at the same time, you feel the stress and the pressure. Can we even get this stuff in? And but yeah, that stuff happens. New information comes up all the time. Josh Summers would have a great saying. We would approach a trial date, and it would get reset for whatever reason.
Yes.
And Josh would lean over and tell me, man, the worst thing they can do is give us more time. And because of that more time, we would, specifically Josh, we would 100% use it. We're out there, we're talking to more witnesses, we're looking at old stuff we really didn't get a chance to look at. And almost every single time we were able to mine some new information out there we were going to use in the trial.
Picking up a new angle, getting more evidence.
Yeah. Worst thing they could do is give us more time.
That's incredible. That's an interesting dynamic. Anthony, I've enjoyed this conversation with you. I've learned quite a bit.
This is fun, Jay.
This is only half of what we have for you related to our interview with Anthony Rodriguez, investigator with the District Attorney's Office. Please join us in 2 weeks where we continue the conversation and learn more about what he does. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and keep sending in your questions. Just tap Text the Judge to share your thoughts, reviews, or questions. We might just read yours on the next Q&A break. Until then, stay tuned.
You've been listening to Beyond the Gavel with Judge Ron Rangel. Join us in the next 2 weeks where we are educating the public and expanding mindsets. Head to our website, beyondthegavelpodcast.com, or your favorite podcast platform to subscribe to the latest episodes and updates.